My name is Linda. I was born in 1938, raised during War and Hope, in a world where a small house and a good neighbor were about all a person needed. George, my husband, was born 3 years before me, and our story together spanned over 60 years in this same small Midwest town. People around here say nothing ever changes, but when you're the one losing, it feels like the world is spinning off its axis. Our home was always busy, always a little chaotic. 2 kids, Jean and Lucy, their friends, the grandkids, church gatherings, George's buddies coming over to fix up something in the garage. Life was full, and I didn't realize how lucky we were until it started to slip away. Jean, my firstborn, my rock and my headache, lives right next door. He's got a sharp tongue and a quicker temper, but he's the first to show up if your tire's flat or your roof is leaking. His wife, Carol, is a saint, putting up with his moods. Their 2 sons, Daniel and Aaron, grew up under my roof as much as theirs. But as soon as they finished college, they took off for Canada, chasing their dreams in a bigger world. They work hard, send money when they can, call on holidays, but my heart aches for the time when I'd trip over their sneakers in my hallway. Lucy is my baby, even though she's in her 50s now. She lives about 70 miles away, but sometimes it feels farther than Canada. Her boys, David and Andy, are 30 and 25, but they still live at home, finding reasons not to get jobs, always between opportunities. Lucy's life has always been one thing after another: broken cars, bills, arguments. She used to call for advice, but lately, it's only if she needs something. When George got sick last winter, Jean and Carol were here every day, bringing food, shoveling snow, doing everything they could to make things easier. Daniel and Aaron even wanted to come back from Canada to say goodbye, but Jean and I told them not to. It was too far, too expensive, and I wanted them to remember their grandfather laughing in the garden, not lying in a hospital bed. Lucy barely called. When she did, it was quick, distracted. "Hope you're holding up, Mom." I tried not to let it hurt, but when you spend your whole life putting others first, you always expect them to do the same. George held on for weeks, but the end came on a cold March night. It was quiet, just me holding his hand, whispering all the things I never said out loud. The funeral felt like a blur. The faces and the casseroles and the rain-soaked shoes. Lucy showed up alone, no sign of her grown sons. "They don't do well with funerals," she said. "And honestly, Mom, why waste the money on gas? They can't help now." I just nodded, too tired to argue. Jean and Carol stood by me the whole time, making sure I didn't have to say a word I didn't want to. After the service, everyone came back to the house. It's an old tradition here. People crowd into the kitchen, bring pies and sandwiches, try to fill the emptiness with stories and laughter. There were a few good moments. Jean told the story of how George accidentally set the shed on fire one 4th of July, and even Lucy cracked a smile. For a second, I almost believed things could go back to how they were. But then, as the house was starting to quiet down, Lucy turned to me, her face tight, and asked, "So, Mom, have you and Dad sorted out the will yet?" You could have heard a pin drop. Jean's face turned hard as granite. Carol pretended to fuss with the coffee mugs. I just stared at Lucy, my daughter, my flesh and blood, looking at me as if I was just a lockbox with a key. I took a breath and tried to keep my voice steady. "Your father and I took care of everything, Lucy. You'll know when it's time." She rolled her eyes, got up, and went out to her car. No hug, no goodbye, just slammed the door and drove away. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind against the windows, and wondered if I'd ever really known my daughter at all. When Jean came over the next morning, he tried to comfort me. "Don't let her get to you, Mom. She's always been like that. Always thinking about what's next, never about what matters." But something had changed inside me. For the first time, I felt a coldness, a kind of distance I didn't know could grow between a mother and her child. In the weeks that followed, Lucy started showing up more and more. She'd never cared much for gardening, but now she was helping pull weeds, organize the garage, even bake cookies, just like old times. At first, I wanted to believe she was finally seeing me, finally wanting to be part of my life. But every visit ended with a question about the will. Had I signed the papers? Did I have everything in order? Did I know how hard it would be for her if something happened? She didn't know, nobody did, except for George and me and the lawyer, that most of what we had was already set aside for Jean. He's the one who kept the place standing, who spent his own money fixing the roof, repainting the porch, making sure the house didn't fall apart. Even when Lucy started acting like she cared, Jean just shrugged. Let her play nice, Mom. Doesn't change what's in her heart. What hurt the most was how Lucy's boys never once called after George died. David showed up once, said he wanted to check in. But all he did was ask about the house, if I planned to sell, if Jean was going to take everything. Before he left, he cornered Jean in the driveway and said, "If you screw my mom out of her share, you'll regret it." That's when I knew for sure. There was no family left here, just people waiting to see what they'd get. The days after George's funeral blurred together like a stretch of gray, rainy sky. For the first week, Jean and Carol made sure I was never alone. They checked in every morning, brought groceries, fixed the squeaky fence gate George had always meant to repair. They worried about me, I could tell, but I was more worried for them. It was Jean's first time truly losing someone. I caught him standing in the garage late at night, just staring at his dad's old workbench like he could still hear the echo of George's laugh. Lucy, on the other hand, kept her distance at first. She texted a few times, said she was busy with her boys, David and Andy, who apparently were both going through a rough patch. She always had an excuse. David's car broke down, Andy had the flu, money was tight, she needed to get the furnace looked at. I listened and nodded, but after so many years the stories started to blend together. But then, right as the grass over George's grave began to settle, Lucy's tone changed. She started calling me every other day, always with that sweet, almost practiced concern in her voice. "How are you holding up, Mom? Have you been eating? Do you need help with the yard? I can come by this weekend and help you clean up." At first, I wanted to believe she just missed her dad and needed to keep busy. So I let her come. She'd show up with a bag of groceries, sometimes things I didn't even eat, then spend hours helping me organize the pantry, the attic, the basement. Sometimes she brought David, now 30, tall and sullen, headphones always around his neck, thumbs tapping his phone. He'd grunt a hello and disappear to the living room, only reappearing when it was time to eat. Andy, 25, never came. "He's just so sensitive, Mom," Lucy said. "He's not ready to see the house without Grandpa." Jean kept his distance on those days. I knew he was struggling with his own grief, but he also couldn't stand to watch Lucy flutter around, acting like the perfect daughter when we both knew she'd barely called in years. Still, I tried to make peace. Maybe losing George would bring us closer. Maybe Lucy would see the work Jean put into keeping this place alive, how he sacrificed his weekends, how he never asked for anything in return. But as the weeks dragged on, the visits from Lucy became less about help and more about questions. "Mom, have you spoken to the lawyer yet? Just in case. You should get all your documents in order. You never know what could happen." I bristled every time she brought it up, but tried to keep my voice even. "Jean is helping me with all the paperwork, Lucy. Everything is fine." I saw the flash of annoyance in her eyes just for a second. "That's good, I guess. Just remember I'm your daughter too." One Sunday after lunch she said it again, out of nowhere. "I just hope you're not putting everything in Jean's name, Mom. I mean, it's only fair to split things evenly. Dad would have wanted that." I set down my teacup a little too hard. "Your father and I made decisions together. You'll know everything in due time." Lucy sighed, gave me a quick hug and left. I stood at the window and watched her car pull away, the taillights glowing red as the sun set behind the oak trees George planted decades ago. That night I found Jean sitting on the porch, staring into the darkness. He didn't look at me as he spoke. "She's not coming for you, Mom. She's coming for the house." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was right. A month after the funeral, Lucy's visits became more frequent. Suddenly she cared about the flower beds, about washing the windows, about things she'd never paid attention to before. She brought up the will in every conversation, sometimes laughing, sometimes serious, always circling back to the same point. "Just don't forget about me, Mom. I know you and Jean are close, but..." One day she even brought up the idea of moving in. "Just for a while until I get back on my feet." I told her gently that I valued my independence, and she didn't bring it up again, but the tension lingered. Jean noticed the change too. "She's acting like this is already her place," he muttered one afternoon, watching Lucy pull weeds in the garden. "Like you're just holding it for her." Carol tried to smooth things over. "It's a hard time for everyone. Maybe she's just scared of losing what's familiar." But I knew better. I saw the calculation behind Lucy's sudden kindness. The way her questions about my health were always followed by questions about the house, the savings, the bank accounts. One Saturday, David showed up without warning. He barely said hello, but spent half an hour poking around the backyard, asking if I planned to sell, if Jean was going to take over everything. Before leaving, he cornered Jean in the driveway. They spoke quietly, but I could see the tension in both their faces from the kitchen window. The visit left a heaviness in the air, like a storm about to break. It all came to a head the day Lucy found out I'd gone to the lawyer's office with Jean. I needed to update the paperwork, put the house in order, and Jean was the only one I trusted to help me with all the confusing legal terms. He was patient, explained things, made sure I didn't miss anything. When Lucy heard from a neighbor that we'd been at the lawyer's office together, she called in a fury. "Why didn't you tell me? Are you trying to cut me out? I have a right to know what's going on." "Lucy," I said as calmly as I could, "I asked Jean to help me because he lives here. This isn't about leaving anyone out. Your father and I made decisions together." But she wouldn't hear it. The next week I got a letter from her attorney. She was demanding her rightful share of the inheritance. Suddenly the woman who hadn't called me in months was threatening to take me to court. The calls from her became aggressive, angry. She even accused Jean of manipulating me. David stopped coming around, but the feeling of tension remained, a silent accusation hovering in every room. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mother or a grandmother. I felt like an obstacle. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the old family photo on the wall. George's smile, Jean's strong arms around his little sister, Lucy's curls bouncing as she laughed. I wanted to go back to that moment, freeze it in time. But the past is a place you can visit, not live in. I poured myself a cup of tea and made a decision. My mission now was to make sure what George and I built would go to the one who had truly kept it alive, even if it meant breaking my own heart. The weeks after Lucy sent her lawyer's letter became some of the longest I can remember. There's a special kind of ache that comes from watching your own child turn on you. Not with rage but with a cold, businesslike insistence. Everything between us. Every Christmas, every scraped knee, every time I stayed up with her through childhood fevers, felt like it had been wiped away by a few lines of legal text. Jean tried to shield me from most of it. He started picking up my mail before I could get to it, sorting out the angry notes from the regular bills. But Lucy wasn't just writing, she was calling too. Sometimes 2-3 times a day. The calls always started the same way. "Mom, how are you feeling?" And ended with, "You know, it would be easier if you just told me what you're planning." Her voice grew sharper each time I refused to explain. One evening after the third call, I put the phone down and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The sun was setting outside, painting the garden in gold, but all I could see was the shadow her words had left in the room. Jean saw what was happening. I could tell by the way he lingered after dinner, finding excuses to fix small things around the house, tightening doorknobs, oiling hinges, anything to be close by. One afternoon, he found me sitting on the porch steps, clutching a letter. He sat beside me in silence for a while, just listening to the cicadas. "You don't have to read every word she writes, Mom," he said finally. "Let me handle it." "I know," I told him. "But I never wanted things to turn out like this." He nodded, his jaw set. Neither did I. It was around this time that the tension started to spill into the neighborhood. Word got around quickly in our small town. People began to ask gentle questions when they saw me at the grocery store, some out of concern, others just curious. I felt exposed, like my private pain was suddenly public property. Then the phone calls turned into something worse. Strange numbers began calling at odd hours, sometimes hanging up as soon as I answered. One night there was a loud bang on the mailbox at midnight. I looked out the window and saw 2 figures hurrying away, but couldn't tell who they were. I tried to keep Jean out of it, but Carol noticed the change in me. One afternoon, she showed up with a homemade pie and wouldn't take no for an answer when I said I wasn't hungry. "You look like you haven't slept in days, Linda," she said, her hand gentle on my shoulder. "This is taking a toll on you." I tried to brush it off, but she wouldn't let it go. "Let Jean take care of things. That's what families are supposed to do." I nodded, but the word stung. What did family even mean anymore? Lucy's visits, when they came, were now almost combative. She'd barge in, inspecting the house, sometimes muttering under her breath about all this work and how she could never handle a place like this. Yet every time she'd end up standing in the living room, arms crossed, waiting for me to give her answers. One Saturday, she brought Andy with her for the first time. He barely looked at me, pacing the front yard, talking loudly on his phone about wasted time and pointless arguments. I offered him lemonade. He refused. Lucy gave me a look that could curdle milk. The message was clear. She was no longer pretending this was about family. David, meanwhile, had stopped visiting altogether, but I knew from neighbors that he was spreading rumors, that Jean was taking advantage of me, that I was being isolated. I heard about these things at church, at the post office, even when I went to buy bread. Suddenly I was the subject of gossip, the center of someone else's story. Jean did his best to protect me, but the stress wore on him too. I heard him on the phone late at night, arguing quietly with someone. One morning, he showed up at my door looking exhausted, eyes rimmed red. "I don't want to fight with her, Mom," he said, voice heavy. "But I'm not going to let her bully you either." I squeezed his hand. "We'll get through this. We have to." But I could see the strain in his shoulders, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the tired way he looked at our old house as if measuring what was left to protect. Then things escalated. One afternoon, Jean came to my house and found the back gate open and muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. Nothing was stolen, but the air inside felt wrong, stale, uneasy, as if someone had been there with bad intentions. We changed the locks that evening. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I signed the paperwork. The next day, someone left an anonymous note under my door, scribbled in angry block letters. "This house isn't yours." There was no signature. Jean insisted I let the police know, but when the officer showed up, he only shook his head sympathetically. "Family disputes get nasty," he said. "Best keep your doors locked and don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number." It was a strange kind of comfort, knowing the law saw this as just another family squabble, nothing worth their time. Carol did her best to lift my spirits, bringing over muffins, insisting on Sunday dinners. But I found myself dreading every ring of the phone, every knock at the door. My home felt less like a haven, more like a battleground. Through all of it, Jean stayed close. He started coming by even more, making sure I wasn't alone after dark, sometimes staying over, "Just to keep you company, Mom." I told him he was being silly, but the truth was I slept better when he was there. One night, as we sat on the porch listening to the wind rustle the trees, he turned to me and said, "No matter what happens, I won't let anyone hurt you." His words brought tears to my eyes, not because I doubted him, but because I knew he was carrying the burden for both of us. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. This wasn't just about the house or the money or even the family name. It was about dignity, about choosing who gets to define the end of your own story. I made up my mind. Whatever happened, I would not be bullied into handing over the life George and I had built to anyone who cared more about paperwork than about love. If I'd ever doubted that things could get worse, the following months proved me wrong. What started as uneasy phone calls and rumors turned into something darker, a sense of siege that settled over the old house like a heavy storm cloud. By late summer, the legal paperwork was in full swing. Every week brought new letters, some from Lucy's attorney, some from mine. Every page was thick with threats, claims, demands for records and signatures. Lucy's lawyer accused Jean of undue influence. Mine kept reassuring me, "Mrs. Williams, as long as you're of sound mind, you decide what happens to your property." But the words didn't comfort me the way I'd hoped. After a lifetime of raising children and keeping peace, I never thought my own daughter would threaten to drag me into court. Jean was there for every appointment. He sat beside me at the notary's office, quietly checking each line. The process felt endless. Paperwork for the house, for the savings account, for the little things George and I never thought would matter. His old truck, the plot at the cemetery, the weathered furniture that held so many memories. Word got around town about the legal fight. Some neighbors stopped waving when I walked by. Others brought over casseroles and left them on the porch, not daring to ask questions. At church, I felt eyes on me, people whispering behind hymnals. Small towns have long memories and sharp tongues. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of my house, taken at night. On the back in thick black marker, "You won't keep it forever." My hand shook as I showed Gene. He took the picture, jaw tightening, and quietly locked every window that night. We didn't call the police. What would we say? My own family is trying to scare me? The tension only grew. I found muddy footprints on the porch one afternoon, fresh even though it hadn't rained in days. Another time the trash cans were overturned. The contents spread across the lawn. I tried to brush it off as kids being kids, but Gene looked at me differently after that, like he was constantly waiting for the next shoe to drop. Carol tried to keep life normal. She insisted I come over for Sunday dinners, made extra desserts, tried to get me to laugh. Sometimes it worked. More often we just sat around her table talking about old times. Before all this started, before Lucy and her sons had become strangers. Lucy herself stopped visiting. Now it was all through lawyers and angry messages. She accused me in writing of being brainwashed by Gene, of not thinking clearly, of turning my back on her family. David and Andy both unfriended me on Facebook, as if cutting off a digital connection could erase a lifetime of birthdays and Christmases. The silence from that side of the family was its own kind of punishment. I spent more and more time alone, wandering from room to room. I'd find myself stopping in the hallway, looking at old family photos, Gene's first day of school, Lucy's high school graduation, the boys as babies in George's arms. How had it come to this? I wondered what George would have thought if he could see us now, splintered. All those years of Sunday barbecues and holiday dinners wiped away by anger over something as cold as a property deed. Then came the threats. Not just the photograph. Now it was text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. "Give it up, old lady," one read. "Your time is almost up." Sometimes the messages came in the middle of the night, waking me in a cold sweat. Gene started keeping his phone on his nightstand just in case. One afternoon Gene came to the house and found something even worse. Someone had smeared filth on the hood of his truck, scrawled the words, "This is my home," in the mess. He didn't show me at first, but Carol told me later, unable to keep it in. Gene just quietly washed the truck himself, then replaced the outdoor security lights with brighter ones. Despite everything, I tried to keep my routines. I still tended my flower beds, still baked banana bread for the neighbors, still left the porch light on for Gene when he worked late. But every creak in the house, every shadow across the lawn, set my heart racing. Through it all, Gene's loyalty never wavered. "You don't deserve this, Mom," he told me one night, his voice soft in the darkness. "After everything you've done for this family." I squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault, Gene. Some things just break." He looked at me, eyes wet. "I just wish Dad was here." So did I. But in his absence I felt a strength I didn't know I had. I would not let fear decide the end of my story. Finally, after months of paperwork and waiting, the day came to sign the last documents. The notary looked at me kindly, checked my ID, watched me sign my name with a steady hand. It was done, the house, the land, the savings, all officially in my name, and set to go to Gene, just as George and I had planned. There was relief but also a deep ache knowing it had to come to this. As we left the office I felt something shift. The threats didn't stop right away, but I no longer felt powerless. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. Not for spite, for love, for loyalty, for the family that had truly been there through every storm. That night I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunset burn gold over the garden. I whispered a thank you to George and to God for giving me the courage to do what needed to be done. I thought the hardest part was behind me once the papers were signed. For a while life seemed almost normal again. The angry calls from Lucy's lawyer slowed, and the text messages stopped. I let myself hope that maybe the storm was passing. But storms have a way of circling back when you least expect them. That October afternoon, everything changed in a heartbeat. I'd been feeling weak for weeks, blaming it on age and grief. That day I tried to get up for lunch, but my body wouldn't move. The room spun. I heard Gene calling my name from outside. He always checked in at noon. I wanted to answer but no words came. He started banging on the window, shouting, "Mom! Mom!" I remember trying to stand but my legs failed me, and everything faded to gray. Gene would later tell me he thought his heart stopped when he saw me through the window, slumped on the couch, unmoving. He ran for the spare key, shouting for Carol to call 911. He fumbled with his phone. hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. "My mom's having a stroke, I think. Please hurry." His voice was wild with panic. He'd never been so scared in his life. The paramedics arrived fast. Jean let them in, tears running down his face, repeating, "Please save her." They loaded me onto the stretcher, put a mask over my face, IVs in my arms, voices moving fast and clinical. "Female, age 86, suspected stroke, chest low, pressure dropping." Jean squeezed my hand until they pulled him away. At the hospital, I drifted further from the world. The lights were too bright, the voices too distant. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even blink in response to Jean's voice. They said I looked at them but didn't recognize anyone. For days, I lay in the ICU, machines humming, monitors beeping. Jean sat by my bed every night, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding my hand. Carol brought fresh clothes and coffee, her face pale with worry. Even Daniel, my grandson from Jean's side, flew in from Canada. He'd always been strong, never showed fear, but this time he broke down, gripping Jean's shoulder in the hospital hallway, sobbing, "She can't leave us, Dad. Not like this." Jean pleaded with the nurses, "Just let him in. Just for a minute. Please, he's her grandson." After some hesitation, they allowed Daniel to sit beside me. He took my hand, eyes brimming with tears, and for a moment I managed to move just a little. My hand brushed his cheek the way I used to do when he was a boy, worried he hadn't eaten. Daniel gasped, tears streaming down his face. He knew I recognized him, even when I couldn't say a word. But I never woke up. On a quiet November morning, with Jean and Carol by my side and Daniel holding my hand, I slipped away, peaceful without pain. The sun was rising outside, turning the window gold. Lucy never called. She never knew. Her sons didn't come. The funeral was small. Just Jean, Carol, Daniel, a few close neighbors, and the minister. For a while it seemed like the world had forgotten me. The house was quiet, the garden still. But Jean said he felt me everywhere. On the porch, in the kitchen, in every kind word from a neighbor who remembered the banana bread, the flowers, the laughter. 6 months after my death, a letter arrived from Lucy's lawyer. She wanted to contest the will. She demanded her rightful share, threatened court, accused Jean of